do you think the chance of a no-deal Brexit is 50-50 or is it 60-40?
I actually think the chance for no-deal Brexit is pretty low, because I don't think the UK Parliament would permit that to happen, and I don't think Europe would want that to happen. So I think it's possible there's a no-deal Brexit, but unlikely. I think what is actually more likely is that there's gridlock in Parliament, because I don't think the Prime Minister's proposition for Brexit is likely to command a majority there.
OK, so what do you think will happen? I know it's a difficult question, one that actually everyone is trying to figure out. But talk to us what you think will happen over the next 6 months.
So the basic problem that you have in the whole Brexit negotiation is that you have a choice whether you stay close to Europe in order to minimise economic damage, but in which case you'll be in some way or other abiding by Europe's rules, and therefore people will ask, well, what's the point of Brexit? Or alternatively, you go to a much harder Brexit, where you break absolutely with Europe, in which case people are going to say, well, what's the price? Because there will be economic damage. And that dilemma has run through the course of the negotiation. The Chequers statement that the Prime Minister adopted a few weeks back was an attempt to resolve that really in favour of the first option, staying close to Europe. But I think after the resignations from her cabinet, that can't really command a majority in the House of Commons. And so we're stuck in this situation. And I think it's very possible, if you end up with paralysis in Parliament, that's where the obvious course, if the government doesn't want to call a general election, and I don't think the Conservative Party will want to do that, the obvious course is to go back to the people.
But how likely is that if it doesn't have full support of the Labour Party? And will the Labour Party, put its full weight behind a second referendum?
I think, you see, if you don't have a gridlock and a proposition gets through Parliament, you'll not have another referendum. But if there is gridlock in Parliament, because the proposal, if she goes soft Brexit, she's got Boris Johnson and people who will vote against it. And if she goes hard Brexit, she's got the other wing of her party who will vote against that. And the Labour Party, in my view, will vote against virtually whatever proposition the government puts forward. So if you end up in that situation where there's paralysis in Parliament, then the choices are pretty narrow. You either crash out without a deal, OK, but for all the reasons we know, that's a very bad idea. Or alternatively, you have a general election. For the Conservative Party to have a general election on the issue of Brexit would be a crazy thing to do. And therefore, even though people at the moment are saying, no, we're not going to have another vote, if you do end up with that paralysis, the logical way out is to go back to the people. And it's actually the rational thing to do, because we've had over 2 years of negotiation. We now have a much enlarged view of what this all means, and we're able to judge after the negotiation what is the best way forward.
But, Mr. Blair, do you think there has been a genuine move in the polls towards remaining in the EU?
I think there are some signs that that's happening, yes. But I think the more important thing is that I think there is a move for people to say, look, once we know what this whole thing means, we should have a chance to have a final say on it. And so I think, the difficulty for the Prime Minister is I entirely understand why she's trying to get a compromise that says, look, OK, we've done Brexit, so we've obeyed, we've honoured the mandate of June 2016, but we've done it in a way to minimise economic damage. The difficulty is, because the way she's proposing leaves us essentially tied to Europe's rules, having lost our say over those rules, which is a bizarre way of taking back control, the problem is the people who have really driven this Brexit debate don't feel that's an honouring of the mandate of June 2016. So the political flaw in her approach is that she's not really satisfying the people like me who passionately believe that we should change this decision and stay, nor the people who've really are in the driving seat of the Brexit bus. That's why I think, even though people will tell you at the moment it's highly unlikely this will happen, actually when you analyse it, unless she can get a majority for her position in the House of Commons, the obvious thing to do, and by the way, the thing that's most in the interest of the Conservative Party to do, is to go back to the people.
Mr. Blair, do you think your intervention in the debate is helpful or unhelpful for your cause?
Some people will like what I say, some people won't, but this is a moment of national crisis for my country. You know, this is going to decide the destiny of Britain for many generations to come. And if you feel passionately and strongly about it, then you've got a right to speak about it. And, you know, there will be lots of debate about who's the best person to speak and who's the best person not to speak. But this is an issue in which I think it's important that the arguments are made, and, you know, I intend to carry on making them.
Do you see a real risk of a return to conflict in Northern Ireland from Brexit?
Well, I think if you end up with a hard border in Northern Ireland, I don't know about risk of conflict, but I think you will increase the likelihood of a move towards a united Ireland, for sure. Now, the government has said that it wants a frictionless border between the north and south of Ireland. But here's the basic problem with the government's negotiating position. All the way through, they're basically trying to achieve fundamentally incompatible objectives. So they say we want frictionless trade between the north and south of Ireland, but at the same time we want out of the customs union and out of the single market. Those two things are mutually incompatible. And at the same time they say, but we want the same system for Northern Ireland as for the rest of the UK. So this is why I think as the course of these negotiations have proceeded and people have started to study the technical detail, and there is a level at which this debate is political and a level at which it really is about the technical detail of what the single market means, what the customs union is, what are the rules governing them. When you look at those technical details, the position of the government on Northern Ireland is also, it's very hard to see what the solution is, which is again why I say once you know, we've been over 2 years trying to negotiate this thing now. We're really not a great deal further on than we were at the beginning. That's why I say in the end, people are going to look at this and say, well, how do you resolve this unless it's clear whether the people want to proceed with Brexit at any cost, which obviously some people do want to do, or whether, given the experience of the last 2 years, they want to stay.
But do you think Europe will back down? You could, you know, argue that Europe works in a certain way where at the 11th hour, Germany and France will actually save Theresa May from a no deal.
Yeah, so this is very, very common. You find this, you know, your Bloomberg report about Germany and Britain, you know, considering ways of easing the details of the negotiation, etc. Completely get it, and you're absolutely right. Europe works through 11th hour compromises, and I'm not saying that won't happen. But here's the compromise Europe will not do. They will not say that Britain can be part of the single market for goods. They may decide that they may in the end agree that you can distinguish in goods and services. I'm not sure. At the moment they're saying not, but let's assume they do. But they'll never agree that Britain should be part of the single market for goods with free access to the single market without abiding by Europe's rules adjudicated by the European Court of Justice. That they will not compromise on. So you're quite right. In the end, you know, there's going to be an enormous desire to find a compromise way through this. But there are certain technical facts that can't be got round. And one of those is that the single market is a unique construct in trading terms, with not just an absence of tariffs, but one system of regulation and rules. And you can't, in the end, have a country say, look, we're going to abide by the rules when we want to, but we've got the freedom to diverge when we also want to. That the Europeans are not going to agree to. So, and then if Theresa May finally, which I suspect will happen, says, OK, we're going to abide by the rules, then there will be substantial numbers of people who voted for Brexit who say, well, what's the point of doing this? We're literally coming out of Europe's rule-making body, in other words, the political structures, but we're still going to be tied to its rules that are now going to be set by others. So this is why this thing is complicated.
Mr. Blair, you met with Matteo Salvini to talk immigration and energy policy. How did that meeting go? And are you concerned that actually Italian populism will break Europe apart?
I mean, it was actually a good and constructive, positive meeting. I mean, look, my view of this is that the thing that is driving populism in Europe today is immigration. That if you believe in keeping Europe together, you've got to deal with the legitimate grievance and anxiety people have about the immigration question. Now, let me make it clear, I'm pro-immigration. I think immigration brings huge benefits to a country. And, you know, a country like Britain has benefited enormously from immigration. But people want rules and order around that immigration, and they want to know that the people coming into our countries are prepared to integrate and abide by our rules and our culture. And this is the fundamental challenge of immigration. And the sensible thing for Europe to do is to listen to that and to deal with it. And by the way, if Europe does that, and I think there are signs it will do that, that has a knock-on effect on the Brexit debate as well, which I believe was driven in large part by anxiety about immigration.
One final question, Mr. Blair. I know you're tight for time, but do you think moderate Labour MPs should actually quit in protest of what we heard from Jeremy Corbyn's position on anti-Semitism, but also nerve agent attack?
Look, I think, I mean, that's a whole other subject, as it were, but I think there is a genuine anxiety in a large part of the Labour Party today that it's been taken over by people who aren't from the normal traditions of the Labour Party. And, you know, I think there will be some people that will want to stay and fight, and other people who can't see the Labour Party be taken back for what I would call a sensible Labour position. So, to be honest, I'm not sure what's going to happen at the moment, but I think this will be a major question. It will be the other possibly big political question that will run throughout British politics for the next year or so.